Alright, we're good. Okay. Dungeons & Dragons is a tabletop role-playing game created in the 1970s by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. Despite tending to fall into a very niche underground market of entertainment, it has seen a major surge in popularity over the past few years. I personally find myself a credible source to talk about it at least a little bit, in part due to the fact that I've been playing for the past 2 years. If you need a little bit of evidence as to that, this is 2 years worth of books that I have collected to play said game. Not all required, but they're all here. Yeah, so I'll be telling you guys about how kind of the reasoning as to why it tended to stay a very niche underground hobby for the most part, and how the internet as well as COVID actually contributed to the rise in popularity of the hobby. So to start, why it was originally quite niche. There was a really nice New York Times article by Amelia Diamond that cited what I found to be 3 main reasons behind it. There was the Satanic Panic of the 1980s, which heavily targeted Dungeons & Dragons as well as metal music, and kind of labeled it as Satan worship, and put out a witch hunt against it. Up until about a decade ago as well, nerd culture was somewhat shunned by the popular community for the most part, but as described, I believe it was an interview it wasn't an interview cited in this article. It was an interview cited in the article from Marisha Ray of Critical Role, who said that nerd culture has somewhat overtaken the entertainment industry through those same shunned nerds coming into being within the entertainment industry. Within that as well, there were also some issues bringing in members of the LGBTQ community, as well as bringing in people of color into the hobby, simply because there were certain things within the culture at the time that was somewhat exclusionary to women, as well as certain character race flavor text within the source books, heavily painting certain character races such as orcs or drow elves as evil in a way that a lot of people saw as somewhat mirroring real-world racism in a way that they weren't really comfortable with. In the past few years, past few editions of the game, they have absolutely moved away from that, but originally back in the 1970s, those things were very rooted in a very Eurocentric, medieval kind of fantasy, as opposed to being a bit more open within that. And that fairly stayed the norm until in the 2010s, when the internet actually picked up D&D within a lot of ways and really contributed to its growth and popularity. Being able to play over video chats and through online rooms, as well as being able to have your own battle maps through the internet, allowed people to connect with people online, which took away a big issue within the community, which was becoming interested and then not being able to find anyone around you or in your neighborhood that was interested, and so you couldn't really play, but you'd be interested in it. But being able to play online with people really helped that. Then there was also streams, shows, podcasts of people actually playing the game in a more scripted sense sometimes, but usually it was still pretty much just playing the game as a means to entertain others. As that became a more commonplace thing to find on different entertainment services, that's also greatly driven up the amount of it's greatly driven up the player base of D&D. And then there's also social media, such as Reddit or Tumblr or any other social media, that's allowed players to talk to one another, interact in ways and talk about things, workshop possible ways to make games run a little bit better and everything. And then kind of right as that was kind of like starting to really ramp up, that's when COVID hit. And with everybody being locked inside and kind of being taken away from social settings and really craving that social interaction, it actually pushed a lot of people into the hobby. There was a CNBC article written by Sarah Whitten that talked about how 2020 in particular was actually one of the best years for sales for D&D as a game. I believe their sales went up by 33%. People wanted to socialize, so they played a social game. Online play from that helped them during COVID so that they would be able to do that without having to go out and interact with people in person. Everyone was watching more shows at the time because we had so much more free time to be at home doing things. So you'd watch more shows, you'd maybe get into a podcast, you'd do something like that. And so the prevalentness of those podcasts and shows of people playing D&D also grew in popularity, as well as people who'd already been playing D&D were able to share it with their family and close friends because that's they were the only people they had to interact with. And that pretty much leads us to where we are now, where it's a little bit more of a household name gaming-wise. And yeah, it managed to go from a very niche underground hobby to a pretty semi-well-known thing for people to play through the internet as well as COVID. It's grown greatly since it originally started, just two guys writing on paper in a garage, to a subservient company, to Hasbro, a major toy company. And yeah, I hope this has helped you guys learn a little bit more about how Dungeons & Dragons got to be where it's at right now.